Hi, everyone. So, I'm back again tonight. We're going to do a little more reading. Super happy to be here. Excited, as usual. Put this up here a little bit. So, I hope everybody's had a beautiful, beautiful Sunday. And you're all cozy and tucked into your bed. Let's light a little sage so we can clear the space and clear the room. Here we go. A little bit. So, let's release the energy of the day and really allow for it to clear the space so that you can feel at ease and comfortable and safe. Right? We want to feel safe so we can fall asleep gently and not have any worries. Here we go. Clarity, creation energy. Let's clear all energies and entities and not serve my highest and best or your highest and best. And that way, we'll transform and transmute all this energy by sending it to Mother Earth. And she's going to be the one that's just going to clear it all for all of us. All right. We also take care of the space. Remove any and all energies and entities that are in, on, and around you. And underneath your bed. No monsters in the bed or under the bed. And clearing and making sure that we leave the day behind. That's what we're looking for. All right. So here, where did we leave off? Gabriel Garcia Marquez is an incredible writer. He used to be a journalist. He's passed away now. But the story is getting more and more exciting. Okay. Before we get started, I want to do one more thing. I want us all to take deep belly breath. We're going to do 3 of them. 3 big belly breaths. And it comes from the belly and it rises all the way up into your crown. And then you exhale through your mouth. So let's hold an intention to release the day. And we want to embrace beautiful, beautiful, relaxing sleep. All right, let's try it. Take a deep belly breath in. And exhale through your mouth. Let's do 2 more times. But this time, when you inhale, you're going to really imagine the beautiful golden white light is coming up from Mother Earth, and it's coming through your root chakra, and it's clearing and cleansing your whole system. So take a deep belly breath in. Deep exhale. Visualize this beautiful golden white light coming up through your root chakra, coming all the way up to the crown, coming back down and clearing your heart, making it pure, beautiful, pure golden white light swirling around and releasing all the toxins, everything that doesn't work in your highest and best. We just let it go. Deep belly breath in. And release. I want to say hello to everyone that's online. And just remember that everything that we do, even if it's in the recording, it's still super powerful. So let's get back to it. So we were left behind, with Dr. Urbino, who has discovered that his lifelong friend, or his older friend, has passed away and has had a secret lover. All right. Let's see here. But no other room displayed the meticulous solemnity of the library, the sanctuary of Dr. Urbino, until old age carried him off. There, all around his father's walnut desk and the tufted leather easy chairs, he had lined the walls and even the windows with shelves behind glass doors, and had arranged in an almost demented order the 3,000 volumes bound in identical calfskin with his initials in gold on the spines. Unlike the other rooms, which were at the mercy of noise and foul winds from the port, the library always enjoyed the tranquility and fragrance of an abbey. Born and raised in the Caribbean superstition that one opened doors and windows to summon a coolness that in fact did not exist, Dr. Urbino and his wife at first felt their hearts oppressed by enclosure, but in the end they were convinced of the merits of the Roman strategy against heat, which consists of closing houses during the lethargy of August in order to keep out the burning air from the street, and then opening them up completely to the night breezes. And from that time on, theirs was the coolest house under the furious La Manga sun, and it was a delight to take a siesta in the darkened bedrooms and to sit on the portico in the afternoon to watch the heavy ash-gray freighters from New Orleans pass by, and at dusk to see the wooden paddles of the riverboats with their shining lights purifying the stagnant garbage heap of the bay with the wake of their music. It was also the best protected from December through March, where the northern winds tore away roofs and spent the night circling like hungry wolves, looking for a crack where they could slip in. No one ever thought that a marriage rooted in such foundations could have any reason not to be happy. In any case, Dr. Urbino was not, when he returned home that morning before 10 o'clock, shaken by the two visits that not only had obliged him to miss Pentecost Mass, but also threatened to change him at an age when everything had seemed complete. He wanted a short siesta until it was time for Dr. Lacides Olviellas gala luncheon, but had found the servants in an uproar as they attempted to catch the parrot, who had flown to the highest branches of the mango tree, where they took him from his cage to clip his wings. He was a deplumed, maniacal parrot who did not speak when asked to, but only when it was least expected. But then he did so with a clarity and rationality that were uncommon among human beings. He had been tutored by Dr. Urbino himself, which afforded him privileges that no one else in the family ever had, not even the children when they were young. He had lived in the house for over 20 years, and no one knew how many years he had been alive before then. Every afternoon, after his siesta, Dr. Urbino sat with him on the terrace in the patio, the coolest spot in the house, and he had summoned the most diligent reserves of his passion for pedagogy until the parrot learned to speak French like an academician. Then, just for love of the labor, he taught him the Latin accompaniment to the Mass and selected passages from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. And he tried, without success, to inculcate in him a working notion of the four arithmetic functions. On one of his last trips to Europe, he brought back the first phonograph with a trumpet speaker, along with many of the latest popular records, as well as those by his favorite classical composers. Day after day, over and over again, for several months, he played the songs of Yves Guibert and Aristide Bruant, who had charmed France during the last century, until the parrot learned them by heart. He sang them in a woman's voice as if they were hers, in a tenor's voice if they were his, and ended with impudent laughter. That was a masterful imitation of the servant girls when they heard him singing in French. The fame of his accomplishments was so widespread that on occasion distinguished visitors who had traveled from the interior on the riverboats would ask permission to see him. And once some of the many English tourists who in those days sailed the banana boats from New Orleans would have bought him at any price. But the day of his greatest glory was when the President of the Republic, Don Marco Fidel Suarez, was with his entourage of cabinet ministers, visited the house. In order to confirm the truth of his reputation, they arrived at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Suffocating in the top hats and frock coats they had worn during the 3 days of official visits under the burning August sun. And they had to leave as curious as when they arrived, because for 2 desperate hours the parrot refused to say a single syllable, ignoring the pleas and threats and public humiliation of Dr. Urbino, who had insisted on the foolhardy invitation despite the sage warnings of his wife. Excuse me. The fact that the parrot could maintain his privileges after that historic act of defiance was the ultimate proof of his sacred rights. No other animal was permitted in the house, with the exception of the land turtle, who had reappeared in the kitchen after 3 or 4 years, when everyone thought he was lost forever. He, however, was not considered a living being, but rather a mineral good luck charm, whose locations one could never be certain of. Dr. Urbino was reluctant to confess his hatred of animals, which he disguised with all kinds of scientific inventions and philosophical pretexts that convinced many, but not his wife. He said that people who loved them to excess were capable of the worst cruelties toward human beings. He said that dogs were not loyal, but servile. The cats were opportunists and traitors. That peacocks were heralds of death. That macaws were simply decorative annoyances. That rabbits fomented greed. That monkeys carried the fever of lust. And that roosters were damned because they had been complicit in the three denials of Christ. On the other hand, Fermina Daza, his wife, who at the time was 72 years old and had already lost the doe's gait of her younger days, was an irrational idolater of tropical flowers and domestic animals, and early in her marriage, she had taken advantage of the novelty of love to keep many more of them in the house than good sense would allow. The first were 3 Dalmatians named after Roman emperors who fought for the favors of a female who did honor to her name of Messalina, for it took her longer to give birth to 9 pups than to conceive another 10. Then there were Abyssinian cats with the profiles of eagles and the manners of pharaohs, cross-eyed Siamese and Pallas, Persians with orange eyes who walked through the rooms like shadowy phantoms and shattered the night with the howling of their witches' Sabbath of love. For several years, an Amazonian monkey, chained by his waist to the mango tree in the patio, elicited a certain compassion because he had the sorrowful face of Archbishop Obdulio Ire, the same candid eyes, the same eloquent hands. That, however, was not the reason Fermina got rid of him, but because he had had the habit of pleasuring himself in honor of the ladies. There were all kinds of Guatemalan birds in cages along the passageways, and premonitory curlews and swamp herons with long yellow legs, and a young stag who came in through the windows to eat the anthurium in the flower pots. Shortly before the last civil war, when there was talk for the first time of a possible visit by the Pope, they had brought a bird of paradise from Guatemala, but it took longer to arrive than to return to its homeland. When it was learned that the announcement of the pontifical visit had been a lie spread by the government to alarm the conspiratorial liberals. Another time, on the smuggler ships from Curaçao, they bought a wicker cage with 6 perfumed crows, identical to the ones that Fermina Daza had kept as a girl in her father's house, and that she still wanted to have as a married woman. But no one could bear the continual flapping of their wings that filled the house with the reek of funeral wreaths. They also brought in an anaconda 4 meters long, whose insomniac hunter's sighs disturbed the darkness in the bedrooms, although it accomplished what they had wanted, which was to frighten with its mortal breath the bats and salamanders and countless species of harmful insects that invaded the house during the rainy months. Dr. Juvenal Urbino, so occupied at the time with his professional obligations and so absorbed in his civic and cultural enterprises, was content to assume that in the midst of so many abominable creatures, his wife was not only the most beautiful woman in the Caribbean, but also the happiest. But one rainy afternoon, at the end of an exhausting day, he encountered a disaster in the house that brought him to his senses Out of the drawing room, and for as far as the eye could see, a stream of dead animals floated in a marsh of blood. The servant girls had climbed on the chairs, not knowing what to do, and they had not yet recovered from the panic of the slaughter. One of the German mastiffs, maddened by a sudden attack of rabies, had torn to pieces every animal of any kind that crossed its path, until the gardener from the house next door found the courage to face him and hack him to pieces with his machete. No one knew how many creatures he had bitten or contaminated with his green slaverings, and so Dr. Urbino ordered the survivors killed and their bodies burned in an isolated field, and he requested the services of Misericordia Hospital for a thorough disinfecting of the house. The only animal to escape, because nobody remembered him, was the giant Lucky Charm tortoise. Fermina Daza admitted for the first time that her husband was right in a domestic matter, and for a long while afterward, she was careful to say no more about animals. She consoled herself with color illustrations from Linnaeus's Natural History, which she framed and hung on the drawing room walls. And perhaps she would eventually have lost all hope of ever seeing an animal in the house again, if it had not been for the thieves who early one morning forced a bathroom window and made off with a silver service that had been in the family for 5 generations. Dr. Urbino put double padlocks on the window frames, secured the doors on the inside with iron crossbars, placed his most valuable possessions in the strongbox, and belatedly acquired the wartime habit of sleeping with a revolver under his pillow. But he opposed the purchase of a fierce dog, vaccinated or unvaccinated, running loose or chained up, even if thieves were to steal everything he owned. Nothing that does not speak will come into this house, he said. He said it to put an end to the specious arguments of his wife, who was once again determined to buy a dog, and he never imagined that his hasty generalization was to cost him his life. Fermina Daza, whose straightforward character had become more subtle with the years, seized on her husband's casual words, and months after the robbery, she returned to the ships from Curacao and bought a Royal Paramaribo parrot, who knew only the blasphemies of sailors, but said them in a voice so human that he was well worth the extravagant price of 12 centavos. He was a fine parrot, lighter than he seemed, with a yellow head and a black tongue, the only way to distinguish him from mangrove parrots, who did not learn to speak even with turpentine suppositories. Dr. Urbino, a good loser, bowed to the ingenuity of his wife, and was even surprised at how amused he was by the advances the parrot made when he was excited by the servant girls. On rainy afternoons, his tongue loosened by the pleasure of having his feathers drenched He uttered phrases from another time which he could not have learned in the house, and which led one to think that he was much older than he appeared. The doctor's final doubts collapsed one night when the thieves tried to get in again through a skylight in the attic, and the parrot frightened them with a massive sparking that could not have been more realistic if it had been real. I lost my place. And with of shouts of stop thief, stop thief, two saving graces he had not learned in the house. It was then that Dr. Urbino took charge of him and ordered the construction of a perch under the mango tree with a container for water, another for ripe bananas, and a trapeze for acrobatics. From December through March, when the nights were cold and the north winds made living outdoors unbearable, he was taken inside to sleep in the bedrooms in a cage covered by a blanket. Although Dr. Urbino suspected that his chronic swollen glands might be a threat to the healthy respiration of humans. For many years, they clipped his wing feathers and let him wander wherever he chose to walk, with his hulking old horseman's gait. But one day, he began to do acrobatic tricks on the beams in the kitchen and fell into the pot of stew with a sailor's shout of every man for himself. And with such good luck that the cook managed to scoop him out with the ladle scalded and deplumed, but still alive. From then on, he was kept in the cage even during the daytime, in defiance of the vulgar belief that cage parrots forget everything they have learned, and let out only in the 4 o'clock coolness for his classes with Dr. Urbino on the terrace in the patio. No one realized in time that his wings were too long, and they were about to clip them that morning when he escaped to the top of the mango tree. And for 3 hours they had not been able to catch him. The servant girls, with the help of other maids in the neighborhood, had used all kinds of tricks to lure him down. But he insisted on staying where he was, laughing madly as he shouted, "Long live the Liberal Party! Long live the Liberal Party!" Damn it, a reckless cry that had cost many a carefree drunk his life. Dr. Urbino could barely see him amid the leaves, and he tried to cajole him in Spanish and French and even in Latin, and the parrot responded in the same languages and with the same emphasis and timbre in his voice. But he did not move from his treetop, convinced that no one was going to make him move voluntarily. Dr. Urbino had them send for the fire department, his most recent civic pastime. Until just a short time before, in fact, fires had been put out by volunteers using brick masons, ladders, buckets of water carried in from wherever it could be found, and methods so disorderly that they sometimes caused more damage than the fires. But for the past year, thanks to a fund organized by the Society for Public Improvement, at which Juvenal Urbino was honorary president, there was a corps of professional firemen and a water truck with a siren and a bell and 2 high-pressure hoses. They were so popular that classes were suspended when the church bells were heard sounding the alarm so that children could watch them fight the fire. At first, that was all they did, but Dr. Urbino told the municipal authorities that in Hamburg he had seen firemen revive a boy found frozen in a basement after a 3-day snowstorm. He had also seen them in a Neapolitan alley lowering a corpse in his coffin from a 10th floor balcony because the stairway in the building had so many twists and turns that the family could not get him down to the street. That was how the local firemen learned to render other emergency services, such as forcing locks or killing poisonous snakes, and the medical school offering them a special course in first aid for minor accidents. So it was in no way peculiar to ask them to please get a distinguished parrot with all the qualities of a gentleman out of a tree. Dr. Urbino said, "Tell them it's for me," and he went to his bedroom to dress for the gala luncheon. The truth was that at that moment, devastated by the letter from Jeremiah de Saint-Amour, he did not really care about the fate of the parrot. Fermina Daza had put on a loose-fitting silk dress belted at the hip, a necklace of real pearls with 6 long, uneven loops, and high-heeled satin shoes that she wore only on very solemn occasions. For by now she was too old for such abuses. Her stylish attire did not seem appropriate for a venerable grandmother, but it suited her figure, long-boned and still slender and erect. Her resilient hands without a single age spot. Her still blue hair bobbed on a slant at her cheek. Her clear almond eyes and her inborn haughtiness were all that were left to her from her wedding portrait. But what she had been deprived of by age, she more than made up for in character and in diligence. She felt very well. The time of iron corsets, bound waists, and bustles that exaggerated buttocks was receding into the past. Liberated bodies, breathing freely, showed themselves for what they were, even at the age of 72. Dr. Urbino found her sitting at the dressing table under the slow blades of the electric fan, putting on her bell-shaped hat, decorated with felt violets. The bedroom was large and bright, with an English bed protected by mosquito netting embroidered in pink, and 2 windows open to the streets in the patio, where one could hear the clamor of cicadas, giddy with premonitions of rain. Ever since their return from the honeymoon, Fermina Daza had chosen her husband's clothes according to the weather and the occasion, and laid them out for him on a chair that night before so they would be ready for him when he came out of the bathroom. She could not remember when she had also begun to help him dress, and finally to dress him. And she was aware that at first she had done it for love. But for the past 5 years or so, she had been obliged to do it, regardless of the reason, because he could not dress himself. They had just celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, and they were not capable of living for even an instant without the other, or without thinking about the other, and the capacity diminished as their age increased. Neither could have said if their mutual dependence was based on love or convenience, but they had never asked the question with their hands on their hearts because both had always preferred not to know the answer. Little by little, she had been discovering the uncertainty of her husband's step, his mood changes, the gaps in his memory, his recent habit of sobbing while he slept. But she did not identify these as the unequivocal signs of final decay, but rather as a happy return to childhood. That was why she did not treat him like a difficult old man, but as a senile baby. And that deception was providential for the two of them because it put them beyond the reach of pity. Life would have been quite another matter for them both if they had learned in time that it was easier to avoid great matrimonial catastrophes than trivial everyday miseries. But if they had learned anything together, it was that wisdom comes to us when it can no longer do any good. For years, Fermina Daza had endured her husband's jubilant dawns with a bitter heart. She clung to the last threads of sleep in order to avoid facing the fatality of another morning full of sinister premonitions, while he awoke with the innocence of a newborn. Each new day was one more day she had won. She heard him awake with the roosters, and his first sign of life was a cough without rhyme or reason that seemed intended to awaken her too. She heard him grumble just to annoy her while she felt around for the slippers that were supposed to be next to the bed. She heard him make his way to the bathroom, groping in the dark. After an hour in his study, when she had fallen asleep again, he would come back to dress, still without turning on the light. Once, during a party game, he had been asked how he defined himself, and he said, "I am a man who dresses in the dark." She heard him, knowing full well that one of those noises was indispensable, and that he made them on purpose, although he pretended not to, just as she was awake and pretended not to be. His motives were clear. He never needed her awake and lucid as much as he did during those fumbling moments. There was no sleeper more elegant than she, with her curved body posed for a dance and her hand across her forehead. But there was also no one more ferocious when anyone disturbed the sensuality of her thinking. She was still asleep when she no longer was. Dr. Urbino knew she was waiting for his slightest sound, that she even would be grateful for it, just so she could blame someone for waking her at 5 o'clock in the morning. So that on the few occasions when he had to feel around in the dark because he could not find his slippers in their customary place, she would suddenly say in a sleepy voice, "You left them in the bathroom last night." Then right after that, her voice fully awake with rage, she would curse the worst misfortune in this house is that nobody lets you sleep. Then she would roll over in bed and turn on the light without the least mercy for herself, content with her first victory of the day. The truth was, they both played a game, mythical and perverse, but for all that comforting. It was one of the most dangerous pleasures of domestic love. But one of those trivial games almost ended the first 30 years of their life together because one day there was no soap in the bathroom. It began with routine simplicity. Dr. Juvenal Urbino had returned to the bedroom in the days when he still bathed without help, and began to dress without turning on the light. As usual, she was in her warm, fetal state, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, that arm from a sacred dance above her head. But she was only half asleep, as usual, and he knew it. After a prolonged sound of starched linen in the darkness, Dr. Urbino said to himself, "I've been bathing for almost a week without any soap." Then, fully awake, she remembered and tossed and turned in fury with the world because, in fact, she had forgotten to replace the soap in the bathroom. She had noticed its absence 3 days earlier when she was already under the shower, and she had planned to replace it afterwards, but then she forgot until the next day. And on the third day, the same thing happened again. The truth was that a week had gone by, as he said, to make her feel more guilty. But 3 unpardonable days and her anger of being found out in a mistake maddened her. As always, she defended herself by attacking. "Well, I've bathed every day," she shouted, beside herself with rage, "and there's always been soap." Although he knew her battle tactics by heart, this time he could not abide them. On some professional pretext or another, he went to live in the interns' quarters at Misericordia Hospital, returning home only to change his clothes before making his evening house calls. She headed for the kitchen when she heard him come in, pretending that she had something to do, and stayed there until she heard his carriage in the street. For the next 3 months, each time they tried to resolve the conflict, they only inflamed their feelings even more. He was not ready to come back as long as she refused to admit there had been no soap in the bathroom, and she was not prepared to have him back until he recognized that he consciously lied to torment her. The incident, of course, gave them the opportunity to evoke many other trivial quarrels from many other dim and turbulent dawns. Resentment stirred up other resentments, reopened old scars, turned them into fresh wounds, and both were dismayed at the desolating proof that in so many years of conjugal battling, they had done little more than nurture their rancor. At last, he proposed that they both submit to an open confession with the Archbishop himself, if necessary, so that God could decide once and for all whether or not there had been soap in the soap dish in the bathroom. Then, despite all her self-control, she lost her temper with a historic cry. To hell with the Archbishop! The impropriety shook the very foundations of the city, gave rise to slanders that were not easy to disprove, and was preserved in popular tradition as if it were a line from an operetta. To hell with the Archbishop! Realizing she had gone too far, she anticipated her husband's predictable response and threatened to move back to her father's old house, which still belonged to her, although it had been rented out for public offices, and live there by herself. It was not an idle threat. She really did want to leave and did not care about the scandal. And her husband realized this in time. He did not have the courage to define his own prejudices, and he capitulated. Not in the sense that he admitted there had been soap in the bathroom, but insofar as he continued to live in the same house with her, although they slept in separate rooms, and he did not say a word to her. They ate in silence, sparring with so much skill that they sent each other messages across the table through the children, and the children never realized that they were not speaking to each other. Since the study had no bathroom, the arrangement solved the problem of noise in the morning, because he came in to bathe after preparing his class and made a sincere effort not to awaken his wife. They would often arrive at the bathroom at the same time. And I lost my place. And then they took turns brushing their teeth before going to sleep. After 4 months had gone by, he lay down on their double bed one night to read until she came out of the bathroom, as he often did, and he fell asleep. She lay down beside him in a rather careless way so that he would wake up and leave. And in fact, he did stir, but instead of getting up, he turned out the light and settled himself on the pillow. She took him by the shoulder to remind him that he was supposed to go to the study, but it felt so comfortable to be back in his great-grandparents' feather bed that he preferred to capitulate. "Let me stay here," he said. "There was soap." Whether they recall this episode, now they had rounded the corner of old age, neither could believe the astonishing truth that this had been the most serious argument in 50 years of living together, and the only one that had made them both want to abandon their responsibilities and begin a new life. Even when they were old and placid, they were careful about bringing it up, for the barely healed wounds could begin to bleed again as if they had been inflicted only yesterday. We'll end here tonight. Sleep tight. See you next time.